There we go. Okay. Well, thank you. And with all of the, regulations we're seeing now and the cookie blocking and just even the changes we're seeing with the platforms, definitely corporations are finding they need to be more accountable, and they also are facing a lot of challenges when it comes to tracking consumers. And that's what this panel is going to be all about. We're going to sort of talk about how companies need to evolve, as well as what they need to try to do in order to solve these problems. And that's what these guys are going to do. So first, can I have you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what your role is?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Eran Metzer, and I am leading data and MarTech at Hearts and Science, which covers the different marketing technologies and the data sources that our clients and our internal practices are using.
Yeah. Good morning, I'm Albert Thompson. I'm the Managing Director of Digital at Walton, Isaacson. We're a full-service advertising agency, do a decent amount of specialization in what I would call consumer segmentation, in particular in the multicultural space as well. Okay,
well, as I was mentioning in the front, with GDPR and CCPA and with the browser defaults coming up, how are you dealing with this with your clients, and what are they doing?
Great topic, and we view GDPR and CCPA as kind of like two different approaches. So I'll focus primarily on CCPA because of the audience here being primarily in the U.S. We need to understand that in order to still run advertising and marketing businesses, we need to rely on data, whether it's first, second, third. Now I keep hearing this new term of neutral party data, but data is still critical component for marketing, right? The idea of doing things where the consumer is involved or engaged or aware are super critical to make this success. If you show an ad that was targeted to a user who's not interested, then the affinity with a brand would get impacted pretty much directly. So most of our practices are evolving right now into dealing with data sets that are consent, that are clean, that are stemming from first-party data, that users are or consumers are aware how they've been collected and how they are being used. That's one aspect. The second aspect that's very important to speak about, there is the strategy of taking data and retargeting these consumers with a new ad or a new product is a small portion of pretty much this industry, right? A lot of the other strategies are evolving around lookalike modeling and propensity scoring and increasing or finding new potential customers for specific brands. So the use of data is a spectrum of different use cases, and I think we don't need to only hone in on whether a user opted out as opposed to how data is being used altogether as in the industry. Long story, long answer, but sorry about that.
No, that was, excuse me. It was good because we kind of look at it the same way. I mean, when you think about the front end of audience targeting, the degree of profiling, a lot of our clients are really focused on, in sales goals. So they're really looking at store activity. From our automotive client that looks at store visit tracking down to the dealership level, as well as actual sales or vehicle registrations, cars bought. Our consumable goods client are looking at store visit tracking, and they're measuring actual sales lifts down to tracking of UPCs. So their view is that we're looking at the supply chain, units moved, and how that impacts in-market planning. So they've sort of surpassed the cookie conversation. I mean, they're looking at the entire continuum from ad exposure to product moving off shelves or off lots that then impact manufacturing goals and output for real business planning. And I think part of the problem is the industry's gotten short-sighted with the notion, as you said, opt-in or opt-out in this one part of the continuum, and it's much bigger than that. It's much longer than that. In this era, you should have probably moved to the stage of looking at if your efforts are essentially moving the product, because that's a better idea about what profit is going to look like, and less so much of just the he's sort of being stuck in sort of the privacy sort of conversation, because regulations is come. I mean, inherently we've seen with digital, the regulations come after the fact, after there's a big sort of snafu, after there's a big human error that is taking place that is now sort of a national global event. So I mean, that's just what it sort of has always sort of been. But most of our clients have tasked us with revenue return. So the notion of privacy laws, they're focusing on something a much bigger ideal, but much more critical to the sustainability of their business.
Well, I mean, in talking about it, you sort of said you evolved past cookies, already. This is not something that you're really having to deal with. What did you do? I mean, is it about, and we do have that opt-in, opt-out, how can maybe we, or for those who haven't evolved yet, prevent that from happening? What can they do to sort of keep that data coming in, that first-party data?
So first-party data is probably, if we're talking about forecasting ahead of 2020, we think that first-party data is the new gold, right? Regardless of where the cookie is ending up, I think we'll, as an industry, we'll find a way to still have and maintain and manage and process third-party cookies or third-party data sets, which are super critical as well. The evolution we have taken, and I highly recommend for anyone in this industry, is to start looking at how data is being collected, how the engagement with the consumer in order to collect this data. So whether it's customer data platforms that allow you to manage consent and allows you to understand the other dimensions of the data sets, whether a consumer opted in to use the data and to use the data for what extent. Are they interested in new products? It's got to have more dimensions than just that consumer visited a site and read an article about certain things. So there's a whole new practice of data strategies that's starting to evolve around data collection, consent around the data, and usage of the data.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, when you start to think about the notion of loyalty is really grounded in transparency. It's not grounded in repetitive engagement. That's probably more akin to stalking, essentially. So when you think about where a company starts, you start with what you're going to do with their information. How you're going to reward them, how you're going to upsell them. That gives you license to build the machine. So when you start talking about, the data management platforms or consumer data platforms, you build it on the premise of obviously trust. This is the problem we've gotten into, is that the collection of information now feels sneaky, as I think in most of it's been termed in the press, like it's unethical or it's been unethically done. Largely because the transparency wasn't there in the beginning, establishing in terms of how we're going to do it, why we're going to do it, what the benefit is from you, and moving to that point. And I think you're spot on in terms about starting with a central core of data management platforms of some sorts, whether you're leveraging through a third-party partner or you're building them in-house, because at that point you've now established the rules of engagement for your business or on behalf of a client in terms of how you will engage with the customers. From that point, you get license to have the type of customer contact you want with the ebbs and flow of input of how they want to be spoken to and when and where and why. And essentially, in that, I mean, that's just a basic premise of relationship building that the industry has really missed. They kind of sort of sped past it, chasing almost on a sort of emotional high on what new thing we need to essentially run down. So it's almost laughable to see these cookie notifications that every time you go on a website or an app, and it's like, well, you're notifying me about something that's on its way out the door. Like, why now? It doesn't even matter. I mean, we moved past that and this will be a dead issue. Instead of brands going back to the beginning and say, let's start the way we probably should have started. It's almost like they're doing it as a disclaimer, like, oh, hey, we just want to let you know we've been looking at this information all along, but we're telling you now, so if you don't like it, you can tell us now that you don't like it, but it's already too late because they've said, without knowing it, they don't like it. So it's some of the stuff you see is humorous in a sense that how did we even get to that point and not instead of starting at that point?
Well, that's even, sorry, but just in terms of with certain brands, letting people know now all of a sudden we're taking your data, and the way they're letting them know. I mean, I think you had mentioned about Uber sort of just, which I experienced, they kind of block everything you're trying to do, and it's very, it's distracting. It's not something that's very user-friendly. So for brands, you obviously need to, it's a subject that's out there. You need to let consumers know that this is going on, but there is a better way to do this.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring this up because I sat on the side and I heard the panel before us, which I highly appreciate the point of view of the people who sat here. I think we're looking at an industry of how our industry interpret CCPA or selling specifically. Is selling using or selling sharing or selling is value exchange? To me, on a personal side, selling is selling and you get something in return. So anything beyond that is, I don't see any room for interpretation. But I think what the question we really need to ask is not just what the law says and how do we interpret this, but also how do we implement this. And we see numerous versions of implementation to comply with CCPA. You brought one example, but primarily if you look at wide variety of brands or sites or apps, some of them would take the most conservative approach and would not allow you to continue without opting out. Just they want to be on the safe side. And it's probably a glitch in their thought. It's not what they intend to do. Others are waiting on the sideline and trying to see, hey, let's see where the wind is going to blow and how it's going to look. I think the right approach here would be to understand that it's happening and there are ways to work in those constraints. We don't need to hide. Transparency is super critical, but you got to make this. You got to give the consumer an option. If the app doesn't let you continue at the moment that you're trying to get to your content or to your specific utility, and you have to opt out, then we're taking this in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one of the situations where the differences in interpretation just becomes distracting, as well as it sounds like a big delay why people really get their house of cards together. And it's come down to one walled garden grandstanding against another. Or you see it this way, well, we're going to do it this way. And you don't know if the position taken is just based upon how they're being litigated against. So our position is to defend in this way because we're going to be in court in a week, and this is going to be part of our defense case, because it's not really solving the problem, and it's not human nor, let's call it, customer-centric. It really seems to be centric around defending profit streams that are already in existence to not fall on one sword, where it's like, no, the sword is actually already in you. You know, the question is how much further is the consumer going to continue to shove it in the next few weeks. I mean, so that's what, is sort of frustrating to sort of watch, is you're not getting to the root of the mistake. Like, you're not owning the failure in where we are so that we can essentially sort of move forward with a better structure. One of the conversations I was having is that, privacy needs to take a page from gaming, like PlayStation. It's like, it needs to be different levels. There's that all-in level, like, you can track me, do whatever you want. I'm fearless, I don't care. I'll opt into everything. Then you need to have different levels where you could essentially say, well, there are only certain things I want you to know about me, but other things that's off the books. All the way down to the person who's like, I'm off the grid. I live in a hole, I'll come out every now and then. Or the scenario-based ones like, okay, during the holiday season, you can bombard me, ping me, because I want every deal under the earth. But after that, I'm disappearing again. And it's like, that is a more sort of suitable structure where there's a sliding scale of how someone could protect their identity just based upon, how they feel, or what stage they're in, or what season we're in, et cetera. Versus this notion of one walled garden puts out a press release that reads this, and the other one, their press release now reads that, and it's like, well, what are we doing here? Right.
Know your consumer and give them basically that seamless experience that they're looking for. Well, in getting into, Google just had third-party data changes. They just announced Facebook has had changes. Is that impacting your clients at all? What are they facing?
We got to find some controversy here, right? Pretty much most agencies are on the same side, right? They're trying to continue to drive value for their clients. Yeah, Google and Facebook are, and I don't think it's just those two. Those are like the primary walled gardens that we need to focus on for this discussion. But there are other major publishers that are following suit, or they're not in the. You can look at Safari as well, right? Blocking ITP and all of those things. I think the impact there is as substantial as what Chrome is trying to do with reduction of cookies or deleting cookies altogether. Google started with this process probably earlier last year with a declaration of removing identities or some sort of a user identifier from their log files. For us as Hearts and Science, we're a data-driven ad agency, so everything we do from planning, strategy, all the way to activation relies on data. And the most granular level of data that is still anonymized, but it's granular data as opposed to panel. So we do need to take our practices and make sure that they work within those media outlets, whether it's Facebook or Google or Amazon or the rest. So there is a kind of like a new trend again of clean room, data clean rooms that each one of these walled gardens are creating, where they allow you to use their data or the data, the media performance data, or any data that they provide within their walls. And if you want to continue to do your analysis, you have to port in your own data, whether it's your client first-party data or data that we learned throughout the years that work well or doesn't. And you can run the same analysis and same measurement within their clean room and use that within that environment. So we are investing a lot in making that happen to continue our business.
Yeah, and for us, I would say it's more circumstantial to the category. I mean, we have a recruitment client where, you know, with some of the stipulations of Facebook, it starts to Facebook networks, starts to marginalize the effectiveness of leveraging social networks just because they advance targeting. It's almost counterintuitive to just utilize their direct console. You know, the history is you always want a direct relationship, not go through a rep firm. We have third-party programmatic partners that can tap into their console, but they have the audience layer on their platform. They can be layered on top of, whether it's from a search targeting perspective or paid social. That was something we were already doing. That's now kind of a requirement just because of the limitations directly in the console. And that means their data stack has additional big data that can allow us to do some of the things we used to do before the provisions. But in certain circumstances, you almost have to reduce spending in that lane and get into another one. So in particular on the employment side, things that are for which discriminatory practices, you know, never should have been done, but after the Cambridge Analytica situation, you can't go anywhere near that. We've had to make, you know, we've always been looking at search of leveraging search insights beyond the search box with search enhanced targeting. So there's a lot of data out there in terms of using search behaviors as a stronger form of intent, whether you're doing an in and around search, whether it cross over to the YouTube realm, or you're literally pulling that through other display targeting. So we've had to make adjustments based upon sort of the new policies, even if it means not necessarily outright abandonment, but reduction of focus and spending because of what you now can't do depending on the client category you're essentially in. And that is just something that will essentially continue. I think their policies have everything to do to what degree that you're forced to accelerate that notion. And look, we're having to educate clients like, look, what we were able to do, we can't do anymore. And there's certain partners who have done an effective job of sort of mirroring the segmentation of these platforms so it is now in their stack. So regardless, it's like, well, we've sort of blueprinted what a large scale of the Facebook audience looks like and their behaviors and all that stuff. So, and there are companies who were just smart enough to do that a long time ago. I don't know if they saw stuff like this coming or they knew that any walled garden could close up shop at the end of the day. So when he talks about data clean rooms, for which Amazon is probably the biggest purveyor of that, and they have a lot of partnerships, that will only be afforded to the P&G and Unilevers of the world. Someone who has $2 billion in advertising clout, where if Amazon doesn't, that's a lot to lose, not only in terms of product SKUs in the inventory, but the amount of investment dollars. But when you start thinking about the Fortune 2000 per se, that's not something they'll be afforded. They'll be left out of that opportunity to form a clean room partnership because it's going to be afforded to the advertisers at the highest threshold. So they'll be forced to look at workarounds or sort of they'll have to sort of life hack their way through how do we still work with Google, Facebook, Amazon, and whoever emerges next, because they won't have the leverage to essentially have be afforded the type of line of sight that some of the biggest advertisers on the planet are going to be afforded in that particular approach. So you're going to see a certain level of craftiness have to enter the space in 2020 to figure out what this now means, in particular if these platforms are core percentages of revenues generated for the bottom line.
Well, in speaking with that, in terms of that craftiness or being more creative about collecting your data, I mean, is there any major changes that you've done? I know it's early on as far as this, but it sounds like something that you've been doing for a while now that you would suggest, and maybe it's a case-by-case basis or maybe not. Is there something that was a certain change or that you pivoted a certain direction to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, we've had to really get into first-party data a lot faster. And look, one of our clients, we took sweepstakes data. I kind of laughed at it because I'm like, well, how and where did you collect this? And we talk about quality of information. We actually put it into lookalike modeling scenario via paid social. It outperformed all the other pre-established segments that had been running for 9 months. So it clearly, even sweepstakes data has value to a particular brand. So that's one thing we've gotten heavier into. The problem is a lot of the audience size, you start with the very small. So then you have to start to build campaigns that have mechanism for lead capture, almost like you're building a series of rabbit holes. So it doesn't matter if it's through search, through social, sweepstakes, events, influencer marketing. I mean, everything now has to have a mechanism of someone to come downstream, not just core CRM strategies, just because now you need to start to build your own first-party stack at sort of light speed. I mean, we're starting to have to pivot around that. Clearly, the average first-party data from a brand is nowhere near as the size of the potential of going through Facebook's network. But with the inability of targeting the way you used to, you don't have a choice. Companies just need to get a lot more centric around their own information. And it's part of the reason you see the push to pulling things in-house, because the centralized notion of data sitting at the core really requires the brand to be a lot smarter and really to own it. So I think that's another trend we're going to see where brands start to pull pieces of let's call it the central intelligence machine around marketing inside their own building, and it's going to start with the data conversation because they just won't have an option anymore. The third-party universe is going to get messy, and clients don't like messy.
Eran.
Very valid point. I would add that we have seen the ability to rely on data providers early on, and I know you hate this term, but I'll say it anyway. We build like an in-house platform that is based on people-based marketing, or in reality what it does is we're starting to look at the persona behind the device and not target by device, but build all our models around the people behind it. A good example of that, if you opted out of your desktop, that doesn't mean that you won't get retargeted on your mobile device. And some people have multiple desktop or laptops and iPads. So the fragmentation of the devices and the different device graph capabilities out there are making the situation even worse. And consumer can't really tell, hey, I opted out of this ad. Why am I keep getting this on my phone? They don't understand that they're like, the marketers or the marketing technology out there, not all of this is relying on the identity graph, but rather based on specific device. So our internal approach was, let's start to move the discussion to a people-based, and with that, I think we have partnered with a couple of different vendors in the identity space, in the consent space, in logged in environments where we can still apply targeting to consumers who are interested, but we're not losing or we're not really relying on a specific device ID or a cookie or any other identifier for targeting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you think about the notion of the cookie, and I know you're going to use it, but I'm going to take it back. Looking at cookie data as an attribution model is like akin to looking at window shopping as the truest form of intent that someone is going to buy. At the end of the day, if they don't stand at the register with the product, with credit card or payment in hand, it doesn't mean they're a buyer. I mean, clickers on the internet aren't hard to get. It's easy to get clicks. You can get fake fans, fake followers, fake anything. We got deep fakes going on. I mean, so at the end of the day, you have to get to a model that is all about multiple vantage points of line of sight around your customer. Past purchase history data, location history, location data, behavioral tracking. You need to look at social data, what they're saying. I mean, you need to dimensionalize the consumer the same way you would size up a good friend. I know what they say, I know what they think, I know what they like, I know the places they go, I know how they spend their money. That becomes the profile, and look, device ID becomes, one vantage point into the looking glass. Is not the it, but it's a more precise beginning of starting to match and make and compile a consumer profile. And that's essentially just sort of where we are. So, for us, we don't even pay attention to the cookie conversation so much because none of our ad targeting partners relied on it in the past 3 years we've been working with them. So all our conversations about SDKs and what can you build into the technology stack, what integration of artificial intelligence and all its derivatives are really going to help us better identify and come up with profiles or targeting profiles we've never thought about before. That's so far beyond the cookie world when you start to get into natural language processing and some of the other AI derivatives that could be the answer, or beginning of the answer in what you're going to build in terms of your consumer model. So that's just sort of where we are. If you're not using some approach that has the letters ID in it, I just kind of question what you're doing in the modern era because I don't see how you're essentially going to get there. And when you start thinking about the kind of information retail stores have about a consumer, I mean, grocery stores, your CVS's of the world, essentially have information on the audience profile, and then some of them, from a retail clothing or automotive dealership, they just have a feel for who walks in the building, and they can size them up as they're coming through the floor. I mean, again, that's the frame of reference really to be building from. Not to say that the cookie didn't have its value, but again, we're so far beyond that. And if you think about that, how you'd size up someone, you'd have to think about how transparent you'd have to be in the flesh about what you are doing, because they'd probably look at you like you were crazy. So when you have that mindset, you naturally start from a place of transparency, and privacy is the first thing you get out the door. I mean, that's like a starting point. Like, I want to get you comfortable with what we're about to do to you.
Well, and even talking about that, talking to your consumer, how are you doing that? How do companies need to talk to the consumer to keep that data in-house, to keep them wanting to give you more information and feel that comfort? Is there a way to speak to them?
It goes back to basics, right? There's got to be some value exchange. Consumers are coming to sites to get something, whether it's content or a utility. They are okay in many cases if the publisher or the service provider, not the technology service provider, but the publisher or the app provides you with, hey, we're going to take this data and we're going to make it easier for you. Next time you want to order food, we're going to know your address and we're going to know what you like. And look, people are fine with, when they're watching Netflix, to get the recommendation. On Amazon, everybody is fine with, you bought this, are you also interested in adding this to your cart, right? It's essentially the same thing, right? It's the publisher have found a way to engage, and that's the key word here, with the consumer to provide them value by tracking what they are doing. So it's no different than that. Obviously, there are some specific sectors, such as pharmaceutical, which is a little bit more sensitive. Again, the recommendation would be a little bit different every time you deal with PHI, and I think it's more about content and education, and the value exchange there is whether it's discounting or more education and being part of a community, but there's always a value exchange.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you said it at the end, start with the community. I mean, Amazon acts like it's a planned community. So when you're on the reservation, they talk to you as if you are. I mean, there's certain brands, Southwest Airlines kind of has that persona as well. Very disarming. in, casually sort of soft selling you or upselling you. And I think just businesses have sort of either never had it or have lost that level of acumen. Had it when they were small, but everyone carries a bit of enterprise mojo when they shouldn't, which is, well, you don't really have the option without us. So those are things we won't necessarily address. And, it's one of those things where it's like, if you were to ask, and that's, Amazon is a good sort of tactical representation. But conceptually, if you were to say, how do you start? It's almost like, well, you should start as if you're talking to a woman, in the sense that a woman's definition of loyalty is transparency. Don't be a liar. It's grounded in empathy. I mean, there are just some basic notions. People have to sort of get along before they go along. I think a lot of brands expect you'll just go along, meaning you'll just buy it, instead of starting from a place of understanding what we are about, what our mission is. I mean, look, there are brands like Tom's Shoes. Look, not the greatest design of shoe apparel in the world, but their mission was so infectious, people just bought them to be supportive of the culture, which skyrocketed him to, the kind of the cover boy of Inc. magazine, an entrepreneur and Fast Company for a number of years. I mean, there are just basic lessons into what his approach was. But again, he started with empathy and transparency around the business and why it sort of mattered, even though, he can't hold a candle to weight to Alexander McQueen's shoes when you start to think about design acumen and affinity and the celebrity and red carpet notion of what the product is. So, there are plenty of examples of companies who've essentially gotten it right. I think that understanding the pace of digital, people have sped past some basics, and those basics are their long tail strategy. And I know we live in a hyper-connected world. We want immediate results and impact tomorrow, but that level of success and trust is not built in an hour. It's built essentially over time with sort of a consistent cadence. And what we see from a lot of brands is they just don't have the patience to make it work. They want to jump essentially to the next thing. Well, this has got to be a quicker, faster solution. Like, no, it's not. There's another roadblock there. You'll find it pretty soon. And that's a lot of what we've had to caution clients around. Like, this is going to take a minute.
Well, and I mean, you both sort of touched on, aside from just how you're talking to the consumers and being transparent, but also then rewarding them as they move forward and give you more information or more data, giving them a reason behind that, whatever the content may be, or some sort of, you're going to get 10% off or whatever it is, but sort of the breadcrumbs to kind of lead them and give you a little bit more information. So, so anyway, I see Steve standing, so I think we want to open it up to any questions.
Yeah, we have time for questions.
I actually have one more I'd like to ask before,
Yeah.
which was, we were supposed to have Meredith here, unfortunately, Meredith Corporation, but she was sick. But one of the questions she did ask, which I want to bring to you guys, is how do you sort of come between, decide between what your client may want and what they're looking for, and resolve that around what might be, appropriate for your agency on its own?
Yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily in different directions, right? After all, we are the agent of our clients, and we are there to do what they're asking us to do within the practice, right? I know we are speaking about privacy and CCPA and the impact, and it tends to have the voice of kind of negativity, but our philosophy continues to go. We need data to run our practice. Our clients want to continue to engage with their consumer. They want to continue to get positive ROI from their marketing dollars and to grow their business. So we're not stopping there. We're continuing to push them, and we're moving to data-driven linear TV, for instance, right? When we are taking data that is consent-based, that's coming from digital footprint, and we're trying to reflect that on linear TV viewership and understanding how that pans out and expanding the practice. So we're going in the kind of not in the opposite direction, but we're not stopping, right? We're embracing, hey, these are the new rules of the games, great. How do we continue to innovate for our clients, and that's what they're basically hiring us to do. So we're there for them.
Yeah, I think on our side, clients get to a point where they just expect you to be doing it. I think when the whole brand safety conversation came out, the way we were already doing a lot of, hyper targeting or advanced targeting, we were well within the realm of being safe because we were so precise in the consumer we were chasing, who was someone who just didn't have time for any of the riffraff, essentially. So when we think about the notion of privacy, it's getting to the same point of they expect us to be smart on their behalf, have conversations up front. If there's certain provisions that need to be taken, we're putting them in front of them, we're doing it, executing it, we just keep it moving. Because at the end of the day, their focus is on essentially making money. What we have done for clients who aren't as akin or just astute is advise them on what they should be doing. In particular, when we talk about the handling of data transfer, and ensuring they have a policy. And look, sometimes they don't know because it's their first time moving information around from out of their corporate confines to a technology stack. And we've said, hey, you should probably engage your lead privacy officer, just so if there's something that needs to be put in place in terms of paperwork provisions, you have the opportunity to do it. We're not going to just take it. So there are times we'll push back and say, you just need to wait and clarify that first and give us the okay, because we don't want to be in a lawsuit with you. So a lot of it, and we have a little bit of history as an agency in the talent management side, so we understand the contractual world. So we just have an acute sensitivity to things that may be more sensitive in terms of what we're doing. We're constantly having conversations around the custom content we create, who has rights to it, whether it's the brand, the talent in it, the publisher who's promoting it. So I think we've just been a little bit more proactive in putting it out there and having the conversation very early, because we know that stuff hangs up programs, executions, opportunities later down the line. So we're just more prudent in terms of picking around and getting clarity and getting documents signed if need be, versus just rolling with it. And look, the fortunate thing is we have enough people who are senior enough in the agency who've been on the wrong side of that to kind of know better. I work with companies like, oh, you haven't gotten your hand slapped yet, and we may be the first agency that has to give it to you. So I think there's a maturity factor even in the partners we deal with, even the talent we work with, that they already understand that world. And then the clients just kind of get akin to, okay, that sounds smart. That's what you should be doing, even if they don't know.
Lisa, Eran, Albert, thank you so much as always. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to wrap this, although